Welcome to Curito Connects. I'm your host, Jenn, and I've been conversing with friends around the world about life challenges and impactful moments. Conversations on this platform look at answering the questions how we overcome challenges and how our experiences shape who we are and the work we do today. I hope this work can inspire you on your own personal and individual journey. Let's dive right in. Hello, my guest today is a fashion design director, having worked for several luxury brands in Paris, London, Berlin to Antwerp. Daniel Hurlin. Hi, Daniel.
Hello.
So Daniel and I first met, I think it was 2010, right? Was that when you came to Taiwan? Was it 2010?
I think so. I mean, I want to say 2005, but that's not true. It just feels so long ago.
It does feel so long ago. What a lifetime ago that was. But
I
yeah, I
know.
think it was around 2010 when you and your other friend Alice, right? You guys came to visit your classmate, our mutual friend Dominic, who is also a designer himself. And I hope to get him on this show too in the near future. I've invited him several times and he has declined, but anyway, we'll see. But we actually met more than once because then I visited Paris in 2013 and we hung out there. And thanks to technology, we have kept in touch since. And I'm thrilled to have watched your career thrive in this last decade and for you to share with us today the topic on innate creativity and how this has been both challenging and impactful for understanding yourself personally and in excelling in your career. So without further ado, I'll stop my rambling here and have you share your journey with us.
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks for having me. It's really fun and nice to be discussing this topic, which is a really important topic I've come to realize, especially as I've been, recently managing like a larger group of younger people, and they're all designers, and it has come back a lot on the table. And I used to have these really nice bi-weekly meetings with them, which are meetings in which you discuss for 20 minutes roughly everything that's happened in the week. And it was really interesting for me to find out how many myths around creativity we are all receiving from an early age. And especially when creativity is your job, how like later on you carry this kind of like weird prejudice and insecurities related to those preconceptions that you have in your mind. And it was kind of a work that we did with many of these people to kind of dispel some of that. And it really made me reflect a lot about myself as well. So I think this is kind of why I think this topic really speaks to me in a way.
Yeah,
So,
I definitely think so. I mean, and it's not only like fashion designers. I mean, obviously this is relevant for any creative, right? Like
yeah.
you could be an artist, you can be a musician. So I guess, can we like rewind back and start in your younger days? Can you remember as early as you can recall, why fashion for you? Right. Or did you want to be an artist?
I think I wanted to be. I wasn't really entirely clear what a fashion designer was when I was a young child. However, it was very clear to me what artists were, and I knew I was going to be an artist because I think when I was 7, I started writing my autobiography as an artist, thinking I would save time later on somehow.
Please tell me you still have that draft notebook somewhere sitting
My
in
mother
your...
has it.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
My mother has it. I mean, I don't even know why. I think I did one day, one drawing, which I really liked. And it was something with like kind of diamonds and crystals. I was really heavily inspired by Sailor Moon. It was definitely one of my biggest crushes when I was like a young child. I found the manga, so like the physical book, not actually the anime. I didn't like the anime quite as much. I found it very like cutesy, but I found the manga kind of nice because it was, they all looked like model. They were really elegant. I've come to learn later that like in a lot of the drawings, they're actually wearing couture gowns, like reproduced from Christian Dior runway or Francais, which is some really famous designer of that era. And then I loved it so much. And then they had these big jewels, and the jewels had powers and they could transform. And I don't know if you remember, but the jewels would also evolve as she would evolve on her journey. It would start with like a smaller a like heart brooch, and then it would have wings and a bigger crystal inside, and like a long like stick with like tons of stuff on it. I mean, I don't know. I used to find it like so hypnotic, like so amazing. I think I read the first and the second tome of the whole saga like 100 times over, maybe. So I was really inspired by her, and I really liked, in general, historical stories about kings and queens, and because they were the stories that had the most descriptions of garments and balls, because obviously to have really beautiful ornate garments you need an occasion, and the occasion would be a ball or some kind of ceremonial whatever, and this happened a lot in like fairy tales, history tales, etc. So I used to love fairy tales as well, like especially fairy tale from around the world that would describe like all these different exotic different things. I don't know, it was really like a massive influence on my life. And I think as a child and for a long time, I used to live a lot in my head, in my imagination, because I grew up gay in like kind of a rural, environment in France, and it just wasn't my vibe. Let's put it this way. I just,
it sounds like you were not so happy growing up. I mean, in that environment, right? Like it was like miserable-ish, if I could use that word.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. And, like for many years, I didn't really understand why. Because, like, I think when you're 6, you don't really know you're gay, but you definitely do feel very different. You feel compelled by certain things. You will see an image of, or maybe when you're 8 or 10, you will see an image of a man that is very appealing, and you will find that really compelling, and you will have no idea why. And, so for you, it doesn't really make any sense, but you can already see adults around you, like, having premonitions, your grandmother saying, "Stop dancing around," to you, but not to your sister, where you like, and I think that was it. I also think, on top of the gay thing, there was a lot of other personality things, that I've learned to deal with age, and, to differentiate, to see the nuances of it and what they could be. And I think like altogether, it was like a really thick barrier to my external environment. And in a certain way, it was very difficult for me to relate to everything in my direct surroundings. So I just kind of lived a lot in my head. I had a really rich inner life. I would play a lot of video games. I would, read a ton. I just kind of loved it. And manga was like my number one passion for like, I don't know, like a good like 10 years, I would say. I would live for it. Because I found it so beautiful and sophisticated, and then they would eat, okay, because Sailor Moon, okay, she gets transformed and she kills all these villains and stuff. But this aside, when she goes home, she has to remove her shoes. She's like kneeling on the floor, and they're eating from that table all these delicious looking but strange looking meals, and I just found that really fascinating, and it made me think that maybe somewhere else there was this sophisticated other place where I would slot in just right. Of course, that's not true, but like, it was like a refuge. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, of course. I'm so glad Sailor Moon was where you felt where you belonged. Yeah. Have you gone? Okay, wait. So I mean, I don't want to sidetrack, but let's stay on track here. So then well, I mean, now that you shared this story with us, I do want to ask, like, at what point were you able to kind of peel that onion, those layers? And then, I mean, going back to fashion again, so you decided to go to fashion school, right?
It was like a bit more complicated than that, but I really liked fashion. So, like as I grew up as a teenager and stuff, like I think fashion became a main mode of expression. So I would dress really flamboyantly, and then again, it's really funny because it seems like it will be maybe a method of connecting with other people. But now that I think of it, it also became some kind of other barrier, because people just would not understand me, and I wouldn't understand them either. And I really, I got so much shit.
For, yeah, like, I was gonna ask, did you get bullied?
Oh my God, so much. And also like, I think I had like almost a sixth sense to choose clothing that would be problematic without really meaning to. I think I remember once I was 16, I bought a pair of flared trousers, ultra bleached with crisscross in silver glitter on it.
Hmm.
And I was wearing that with like a polyester shirt with a print of the galaxy on it. And this was in 2000 something, like early 2000s in the suburbs. And it was like, I mean, obviously, I got threatened to be beat up, etc. The only redeeming thing in all this is I developed pretty good self-confidence and I'm pretty tall. So, people would think twice before actually doing it. So, but yeah, it was very like crazy. And then my mom, just had no idea how to react with that. She was like, well, maybe you shouldn't dress like this. And like, obviously you shouldn't say that, but like, what else was she supposed to say? I mean, I think she's never had this problem. She couldn't get it. And I was like, no, it has nothing to do with it.
But bless her heart, but she stuck with you. I mean, she supported you.
Yeah.
In ways she knew best. In ways she knew best, right? Like how to kind of be there for you, but kind of protect you at the same time and try to understand you.
Yeah, I think I honestly, of course, I feel like, if I had children now and if they went through something similar, I would take it completely differently. But I mean, I do felt unconditional love. And I do think, because I was so headstrong in my choices, my parents really went with it to evolve. But also because, and this is, again, the same thing that I was telling you earlier, I'm not entirely sure what part of this is just me as I am, or what part of it is just maybe I'm a little neurodiverse, but I would not be able to lie or to be different. Every time I tried to be really normal to fit in the theme, it just would backfire like ridiculously. So, I learned very early on that there was no choice but to be myself because all the other choices just didn't work, and I think maybe that realization made people who were close to me have to accept it because I think they could see that I just couldn't, I couldn't do anything about it myself,
right?
Even though I tried,
right? And you did try, right? Like it's not like you were like fighting against it. You were like, okay, I'm gonna try to.
I tried so hard. I tried to change my hair, tried to change the way I walked, tried to change the way I speak, tried to hang out with different people, tried to get some other interests. Yeah, I tried really, really hard. I tried to disguise everything. I tried to not talk about the fact that I'm gay to people. I really tried so many things, but it just never really worked. And, then after that, but it's interesting because it's really given me maybe a more nuanced approach of things, having to be so critical against yourself. Of course, I would have preferred to just be myself. But now I think it gives me a lot more empathy to a lot more people because I feel like identify to that,
right.
Trying to be someone else. Anyways.
Well, well, that was a great foundation for us to really understand your upbringing and how you beat through all that. You were able to stay very grounded at a very early age, actually, right? To be comfortable in your own skin, to really know yourself, right? And this is great because what I meant by great was because then we can transition into this topic that we had been talking about before we started recording, which is, in the fashion industry, right? And we want to talk about innate creativity, which I'll let you kind of elaborate on because prior to you telling me innate creativity, I didn't even really think about that actually. So, if you can elaborate on innate creativity and why that was the topic you chose, but, then we can kind of dive into this whole, give people an exposure of the fashion world, right? From the back end, from the side we don't see, or, that we see on movies and TV shows, right?
Yeah. I mean, so fashion is really heavily glamorized now. And it is something that sounds really amazing and really shiny from afar. And that's always part of the appeal. I mean, a little bit less for me because I think I just really liked the products of it and I just really liked the vision of it. But like the glamour part was interesting, but not as interesting as it may be some others. And so when I studied at St. Martin's, you did this kind of like general year where you do everything. And at the time I did think I was going to do fine arts. Because I just found the social environment in fashion was maybe not suiting me. I felt like it was full of like, the things that I was trying to escape in some way, which is really funny because it had been my, the light at the end of the tunnel for me. And I was like, oh, I feel like no, I don't feel like I can do that. But really interestingly, at the St. Martin's Foundation, this woman, I can't remember what what her name was. She was some kind of like director of that first year. And everyone wanted to do fashion in that foundation. And then since I didn't want to do it, it was so much easier for me because I was like, no, I'm not doing it. But I did do the trial thing, so you have 3 weeks in, I think, each course. And so when I did the fashion one, like people were just having complete meltdowns. And I think one of the first things this woman said, she was like, well, there's a really big difference in between being a consumer of fashion and being a fashion creator. And I always thought, oh yeah, that's so true, actually. It's like, because it's really different. One is really like the more glamour parts, which is when the product is almost done and you have all of that. And in fact, now it's really jobs. It's like being a stylist or whatever, and they're really like interesting jobs. But at the time, they were less, I guess, well known. And then the design part is the unglamorous part because it's everything prior to the product.
Right.
So you have a lot less glamour on that side. It's the side where you're like there at 2 a.m. for the nth time in a row, looking at some fucking twirl and like some really tired model, and everyone's really tired. And that part is like the not as glamorous. And you go to the factory, and again, it's not a glamorous area, even though the people in the factories are amazing and they're artistic and stuff, but it's not glamorous. It's in an industrial area. It's not in the center of the city in some luxurious hotel,
So initially you were going to do like painting because you said fine arts. Like, were you going to become a painter or?
No, more like an installation artist.
Mm.
I just, so, I was really interested in concept and how it translated into a physical reality. And I like that in fine arts, things could be really threadbare, but really impressive at the same time, And I think when I was younger, one of the artist movements that I liked the most was called Arte Povera, which means poor art in Italian. And it was this extremely modern movement where in the 60s, these Italian people created these pieces of art, usually installations, but also other nature, with usual objects in a way that made it look a little poor, but also had such strong, raw aesthetic and message. And I felt very moved by this. And so then I thought, oh, well, maybe there is this possibility. But I also realized one thing, and this is where I think I have to always thank my mother, when there was this, I don't know, can you say pitchfork? I don't know, like the road separates in two, and you have to choose one of them. She said to me, she was like, just don't do fine art. She was like, it's just all about talking. It's all about this concept, but I know you and you're going to be, so bored. I think you want this pace and this excitement and this hit that fashion brings. And she says, like, fashion will bring you to be in other countries. Fine arts, you can do it in France. And she was like, just do it. I know this is where you'll be happier. And I think just like that, she kind of like really helped me decide. So I'm really grateful to her for that advice.
Mother knows best.
Not always, but this time she did. She sometimes gets really like angry because I always ask for her opinion and rarely follow it. And I told her very early on, I was like, listen, when I ask you for your opinion, I don't want you to give me an advice. I want you to give me an idea of what you think so that I can see my situation from another perspective. So I was like, this is why I'm not taking your advice. It's not because I wanted your advice in the first place. I wanted your vision. Yeah, anyways, that's pretty funny. So, and there came this road, and then I had to decide what to do. And then I was like, okay, if however much I decide not to do fashion, I'm always interested in textile and in clothes. And even my fine arts was kind of related to that. And I was like, I just have to stop, and I can't decide not to do a career just because I don't like the social environment of the school. It's kind of stupid. And at this point, I decided to stick with it and to get over all my anxieties, just go for it.
And how did you get over your anxiety?
Just by deciding to do it. It's really hard to like explain this, but for example, I just feel like when you ask people how they've done something, they never have a really good explanation, and that's because there isn't one really. My grandmother, her husband died when my mother was really young, but she she had so many businesses and she was relentless, and she always grew them. Then she got a restaurant, then she got a Michelin star, even though she had no prior like cooking training. I was like, how did you do it? And she was like, I just had no choice, so I just did it. And I thought that was a really good way, you know, because like when you're in front of the situation, then you just kind of have to go with it. You have to believe and trust in yourself enough, and you have to try and find a way for it to work for you.
I like what your grandmother said.
Yeah, I feel like I'm quoting a lot. I mean, I have to say I've always loved my grandparents. I mean, I love everyone in my family, but my grandparents specifically were such characters, and they've always been like a big inspiration in my life, you know?
Did they get to live to see you excel in your fashion career?
Only one of them. But it's really funny because my other grandmother, I sometimes have dreams where she's in it and we have conversations. Yeah. So so I feel like, yeah, she knows. I mean, even if it's like my brain just making it work, but you know, it works for me.
Very cool. Going back to when you first opened and talked about mentoring your staff, like your younger staff members, and what you were realizing in the conversations you were having with them, and how does that go back to for yourself having, you know, let's say this is almost two decades, are we hitting 2 decades, a decade, or 15 years ish in this career path, that you see a lot of resemblance of yourself when you were a young designer and as a creative, and how some, you know, I guess like you were saying earlier, debunking certain myths in this industry. And I guess in some ways it's like, what would you have told your younger self, what you know now? And how did you yourself kind of get out of that funk too, right? And we had talked about this previously too. A lot of times, young students who go through fashion school want to, you know, I guess there's two tracks, right? Either you want to go through school and do your own collection and be your own boss and go down that path, right? You're talking about the fork road, or you decide, hey, you know, I want to work for these amazing brands and work under these amazing creative directors, and walk down that path. Two very different paths, both of which you've done too. So yeah, I'm going to circle us back into this.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I feel like I'm going on a lot of tangents. There's actually a third path that you haven't talked about, which happens a lot.
Consulting. Huh?
No, actually, it's just not working either as a fashion designer, so working another role in fashion, or just not working in fashion at all. This happens quite a lot, actually, because there's so many fashion schools, and there's nowhere near the amount of jobs or opportunities that for all these people. And that, I think, is something that needs to be said, because I think there is a lot of a myth about that, and it's a real industry in which they make a lot of money. Like, the schools are not cheap. Like, if you know anybody who's done them, it's like tens of thousands, maybe more, to do this. So I think that I always feel like is unfair and should be stated first of all. You know, it's very, very competitive, and I think it brings it to the second point. You know, where you're talking about, you know, the confidence, the things that you learn inside you, and the two career path. Basically, when you do your fashion, when I entered the fashion school, I had so many misconceptions, but I also had no idea, and I didn't really like the other people, let's be honest. But because of my own prejudice, and also because of who I was, the things that I experienced, how I handled physical, like social contact, I found all of that really excruciating. But when they arrived, so many of them were so impressive. They were dressed in cool designer brands, or if not, things that were cheaper but looked really good. They knew everything. They went to parties. They had really good contacts and knew some people. They looked great. Some people looked almost like models. You know, at the time, almost like models, because models were a lot more standard, but these days, models. I mean, if I were in school now, you know, I would imagine a lot of them have got actually a lot of followers on different social medias, which I think would probably give me, like, again, anxiety, because if I hadn't been able to do that myself, then I'd feel already like I've pre-failed, even though I'm just starting my career. And then, you know, because fashion is so subjective, and creativity is really subjective, you really have this feeling that some people have got this innate everything is perfect type thing, and that you're never gonna be able to equal or have as successful a career. And somehow you can feel very invisible very quickly, and you can also, it can take a real dent in your confidence, especially, for example, if you don't come from a background that's like as rich, not necessarily in terms of money, but also in terms of contacts and cultural exchanges, etc. Because maybe you were a big fish in a small pond, but suddenly you're like a tiny fish in a much bigger pond. And so that makes you really doubt and wonder whether your voice is really, like makes sense or is really important. And, sometimes if you have some really great skills that you can already express yourself into, for example, some people are amazing at painting or drawing and stuff. So it will add like an artistic edge to a lot of the things that they do, and this will become like a weapon. But if what you rely on is just the strength of your idea and you have to develop everything else, you can really feel a lot of inferiority. And it was interesting because during my school years and even during my working years after, I just felt a sinking sense of being really uncool, unconnected, not adequate, maybe not imaginative enough, etc. And I would always really, really doubt myself. Often, in many situations, I wouldn't show it or express it so much, but I would be in this kind of inner turmoil. And my way of dealing with it was to produce more and more and more, just in order to like balance and stuff. And then later on, it became kind of a signature. The ability to produce really quickly a profusion of different ideas meant that I had more to choose from. But like at the time, it was really tiring and really worrying because it was done in like this kind of, I can't do this, I can't do that. And because in your head you're trying to rank it. You're like, oh well, this person has these ideas that are like really cool and really modern right now, and they really look like this designer, so it's really great. And everyone's like, oh my god, so and so is so cool and looks so great. And you're like, yes, they do. And you're like, what am I? I'm definitely not as cool as the first person, not as beautiful as the second person, not as connected as the third person, definitely not as rich as the fourth person. So you're like, and it's because fashion is a lot about this kind of things. It's extremely competitive. So you get to a point where you can really doubt your own creativity. And I find that I missed voices where people would be like, come up and be like, well, listen, you actually, the things that I've seen you do in this way are actually really elegant. They're really tailored to that kind of market. They work extremely well. And this is something that you can use. It doesn't mean you're restricted to that. It doesn't mean you're married to that. But it means that you can do that really easily, and that this is a lucrative and interesting skill for you to have. Taking it with a little bit more of a distance, making it a little bit more neutral, giving you actual kind of, words, putting words, quantities, and appreciations on things. And I think this is not something that happens often enough, especially with younger people and younger designer. And that I think it makes it very difficult, because then it creates like a universe where like no one's really confident. Everything is really like, it's really hard to tell what's good, what's not. So yeah, that was kind of where I was in my head, and what slowly kind of started decanting in my mind, to respect different people's point of view and creativity, to be able to assess them in a more neutral way, rather than just going for the things that I like or the thing that I thought were cool, but be like, this person has a really classic style that can produce really elegant things that are tailored for a market of people who have really like safe taste, but really beautiful taste. This person can do something really explosive and creative, but maybe they're a little bit limited when it comes to refining things. And this is maybe where they can grow, this kind of things. And these are elements that you can work from, not, oh, it's really cool, or it's really uncool, or it doesn't work, or, like, this is just like, you know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying. I mean, people can't see our facial reactions here, but I'm kind of, like my mouth is dropping, going, oh my God, it's so cutthroat. Like, in a way, it's so funny because so much of creativity comes from within, right? And like what you said earlier, what you've been exposed to, it's very much an expression of yourself too, right? Whatever modality it is that you choose, right? Like wherever, like kind of what you said earlier, wherever your niche technique is at, right? And really being able to own that technique and style and be like, this is what I love doing and this is what I'm good at. And, kind of throwing yourself out there into the bigger ocean. So as you said earlier, but at the same time, it almost also sounds like for young designers, the environment doesn't also hold that kind of space, like what you just said, where there's more, like, would you say that you had a lot of great mentors who also guided you in that path, right? Like, I feel like once you, it almost sounds like, I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost sounds like once you graduate from school and get thrown out there, it's like, okay, go fight now. Go fend for yourself, and you might be competing for the same job with a classmate of yours, or, and like you said, when you get to, there's so many facets and so many different job opportunities in the industry, but as a creative, as a designer, that funnel is small, right? Then you kind of all know each other and you kind of all know each other's talents and, so.
It's very incestuous in that way. But yeah, I think you're completely right. I think there's multiple aspects to this, as you said. I think, first of all, it took me a long while to understand who I was, the things that made me feel really uncomfortable personality-wise, certain traits that I had that I really had to deal with. And I think this is something that could only happen with time and, like, maturity and stuff. But I mean, yeah, aside from that, I did find it very cutthroat. And some people had a completely different experience. I know a few people who have had these amazing careers because, they've somehow met the right person early on, and this person has taken them and brought them on this journey with them, and they've had like stellar career because this alchemy worked really well. But I also kind of felt like it was never going to be my thing because I'm not somebody who's really good at being mentored. I feel like I have to learn things by myself. And, in that way, it just didn't really connect. And I also, I don't think there's also a luck factor, and it wasn't there. But I do think it's really hard for a lot of people. And there is a reason why a lot of people leave fashion to become yoga teachers. And that's because actually, I know quite a few people. And I'm really happy for them because I do think, like, they find something that, rather than working on people's appearance, they work on people's inner peace. And, like, what a beautiful thing to do. But I do think there is a reason for that, and that I think in the fashion industry, and I'm putting myself in there, I think we really have to strive for more inclusion, for better treatment of younger designers, people who are other things. And I think it is our duty to help them grow creatively, grow as professional and human beings. And I think it's totally doable. It's totally possible. But I think it requires a degree of openness, especially if you're the manager, to explain, well, I actually really struggled with this in my career before. I agree with you. Or, even if you see things, you open a magazine or Instagram and this person is extremely, like, suddenly really famous and stuff. And, sometimes you have to dispel that. I remember being at the pub with, like, some of my young designers and be like, listen, I read an article about this designer who's 25 in the New Yorker, who's, like, great and everything's happening great. But I think if you read between the lines, you can see this person comes from a really wealthy background. It doesn't diminish their ability. It doesn't diminish their, the fact that they're, like, really good and, they have a really great sense of aesthetics. But it also needs to be said that stellar careers happen a lot easier when you don't have to worry about the rent that you have to pay, when you don't have to worry about, like, when you're next going to eat. Are you going to have to go back home to some random rural place and live in your parents' basement? It works a lot better if you can go on holidays between jobs, which, you can't really do when you're, like, younger and, you're on a really low salary. So there's a lot of things like this. And I think, if within the fashion industry we continue to propagate ideas like that, then I think it's quite negative. I think it's important.
I like that you brought up that article because I do feel like we don't talk about it enough and we don't give people credit for, it's kind of like what you said, with social media, you just see so many things, right? And fashion world, and again, creative world, it's all visual. So much of it's so visual, right? And with all these tools, it's so easy to just put something out there, right? Whether or not there is substance or content or et cetera, right? Because it's just so easy to visually put something that looks nice, that makes sense, that could potentially be something, but it's so much noise. And at the same time, individuals, like you said in that article, who, you know, has talent, but has that background to be able to do what they're doing, you know, still have to give them credit for having the talent, but also acknowledge that there is a reason how that individual got 10 steps ahead of you. And there is nothing wrong with that. Like, you know, I think there's a sense of also jealousy sometimes in there. It's like, oh, okay, well, that was easy for them because they were born into that family, and then they had the money and they had the connections to, you know, to rent a studio space and, you know, fund all of that, fund their label, so to speak. But I think we have to also look at it from the other side, like you said, and be like, you know, well, good for them. You know, it's also a big step to do that, because it's not easy either, right? It might seem like so easy for them, but they're also struggling in other ways. You know,
I mean, definitely.
So I think it's important to, you know, which you obviously told your mentees, like it's important to read between the lines and understand it from all angles, right? It's not so, you know, quick to point your finger at them and say, "Ugh, look at that." Of course,
I mean,
they did
definitely.
it.
I can see how, you know, that's tempting also, you know, when you feel like you've struggled for so long and you see somebody like making it in 2 years, you know, like who seems to have like the perfect life. And of course not. But I also feel like, you know, this is also a job that, you know, I think a lot of people have to do these days, where, you know, you have to recognize your own privilege. I mean, for example, you know, the title I got to, I'm white, I'm a cisgender man. There's a few other people who had the same title and they were also white cisgender men. And, you know, then you can also be like, well, I got it from my merit, but maybe not just from my merit, you know, because where I don't know, like a black woman, clearly I wouldn't have gotten that title. I mean, maybe, you know, like it just seemed like it's not there. So I think, you know, you have to also be critical of your own situation, because you know, the same thing could happen to you, really, you know.
Yeah. So empathetic, being empathetic always.
I mean, it's funny because, like, I think a lot of people, I'm also pretty like outspoken and sometimes pretty pissed off. So I don't know if people would like necessarily say I'm the most empathetic person straight away, but I think I run a little deeper than that, I hope. And there's an undercurrent of empathy somewhere underneath.
Well, hopefully, you know, when you work with others in the future, if you feel like, you know, if they felt like their feelings were hurt, you can just throw them this episode and be like, have a listen. It's much deeper than that 10-minute interaction we just had in that meeting.
Exactly. I've insulted you, but listen to this. I could also not insult you sometimes when you not piss me off. No, but yeah. I mean, I don't know. But going back to like innate creativity, one thing I used to say to them also, a lot of them, especially the younger people who are more like trainees and stuff, I used to say to them, there is this myth, because, you know, on some projects, since we do visuals, you know, like in my team, it would be like all the visuals that go on the product. You know, sometimes you get a bit of something that's for like, I don't know, motorcycle, and it's really exciting, it's totally up your alley. Then you have to do something very delicate with flowers for some kind of a blouse, and you don't feel the vibe, and it looks like shit, everything that you do, and you think you're following the subject, but you're really not. Everything you're producing sucks. You know, I don't like any of it, I tell you. And, you know, then it's like a little meltdown, and then we discuss it. And then I think I always say to them, you know, there is this idea that some people just will sit there and like the ideas will keep flowing all the time. And it's so not true. It's also such a practice, you know, you have to like have your own shortcuts, understand how your creativity works, probably in waves. Probably you need to also have a setup, you know, where you feel comfortable working in. Maybe you will work on a Photoshop silhouette, you know, where you take a picture of something and you immediately put images inside the silhouette to try and compose something that looks nice with it, but maybe that's not your vibe as well. So maybe you have to find that way. And you need to be really quite consistent and question your practice. If you notice that you have patterns that kind of bring you down and you really get stuck, maybe you get 3 or 5 really nice ideas, and then when you have to refine them further so that they become full integrated design, you get stuck because somehow you can't refine them further, and you can tell, it took you half an hour and suddenly it takes you 2 days and it's not even finished. Then you have to be really critical and be like, okay, that doesn't work for me. So how can I make, that next step where it's less creative but still creative work for myself? And then you have to understand, what works for you and what doesn't. Maybe you need to listen to certain music. Maybe you need to listen to no music. Maybe you need to take a break every hour. Maybe you need to take a break every 30 minutes, but a really quick break. Maybe you need to work in another room. All these different things. And I think these are really, really important, because even really famous artists, I don't know about Picasso, but like a lot of really famous artists, they do work with a method to optimize their work, because they know, if you're going to paint 100 or 150 paintings, then you better have your method. Otherwise, you're going to be wasting a ton of time on boring bits. So, yeah.
Do they teach you this in school?
Not at all. And I think that's hilarious. Because I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. When I got out of school, I felt like I didn't really know, I felt like I learned everything on the job. And, I'm not saying everyone did a bad job, but I was a little bit like, it wasn't really so helpful, at least to me. Maybe the method was not in tune with what was in the industry. I think some part of it was that,
But is this something that like you and your other creative friends chat about? Like, kind of like, okay, so I would consider myself half a creative, coming up with Curito, and what I'm doing is, there is a creative process to it. And there are times where I get stuck, right? So I'm like, I'm stuck, like, like I'm stuck. I can't, like, I have like this block. I'm not, and kind of like what you just said earlier, like I do need to be, I have to change environment sometimes, or like once I get this idea, like I'm sitting down for hours and it's like, please don't interrupt me, because that creative juice is in my head right now. And if you interrupt me, then that will just like F my, my working mojo, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious also if, as creatives, this is something you guys kind of share, it's kind of like, oh yeah, when I get stuck, this is what I do, or like, do you guys kind of throw these ideas around and share sometimes? Or maybe this is what you should bring into your 20-minute mentee bi-weekly meetings too.
Well, I mean, this is honestly, this is the first thing I do usually when I get anywhere. I just say, because I have like pretty set, not rigid, but I have a pretty set way of working. Like, it's because I'm somebody who likes systems. If I don't have a system, I actually get really demotivated. I can be very fast and faster than a lot of other people if I have my system. If not, then I can be slower than everyone else because I have no idea where I'm going. I get really distracted. I don't think about it. I'm not motivated and stuff.
Was that something you developed over time? Like that, you were like, oh, this really works for me. Like, this is how this, like, how long did that take for you to figure that out?
I think quite a few years. Essentially what happened is this. I realized early on that I could do some things extremely quicker than everyone else. And they looked really good and they were really convincing. But then when it came to refining them, I was slower than everyone else. And I felt like the refining part was not necessarily the most creative, difficult part. So I was like, why am I so stuck on this? And then I slowly realized a lot of things that were really important for me. I have to listen to reality TV episodes when I'm working on the refining parts because they're 45 minutes long. They're all people talking to one another, so I don't really have to pay attention. But if it's music, it's too short. And then I will maybe object to the next song, or I will not feel comfortable with it. So it distracts me too much. So, things like this. But that's really when I work for me. But for example, I'm also very organized in how I want it. I like to have one kind of support, like media size for everything. Then once I've gotten to a certain stage, I print everything out to look at it in a different environment, so not on the computer anymore, but in real life. Then I will do a first edit. I will write all the comments of everything I want to change in a long list with everything, like every little thing that I've printed. And then I will go through each of the comments methodically to try and like erase everything. And then of course I'll have other ideas while I do that. But because I drive it in chunks, and in chunks that seem achievable, like the end result comes a lot easier.
That's your system.
That is, but this really only happened because some of it was like me realizing that, and then I have to say there is this one person that I've worked with for years. And she and I, we're very like different but complementary. And I learned a lot from working with her. I thought she was like incredible in being extremely organized, extremely efficient. And, you know, we had like a very different life experience and stuff. But I mean, we loved each other. We were really good friends to this day. But I felt like I learned so much from her. And I felt like I just did this thing where you kind of like absorb something from somebody.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, this can work for me in that way. And I think she kind of did the same as well. And so I think it was really like a super beneficial exchange. And I owe a lot to this person.
That sounds like a healthy working relationship there.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. Also, we've been through so much together, you know, like having to do all these late nights and stuff. So I think, you know, this bond feels so strong.
Yeah.
You know?
That's so nice.
I know.
So there's definitely positive sides to it all too. We're kind of coming short on time. So
Okay.
Before we wrap up, I mean, thank you again for sharing so much. That was very insightful. But I have a few questions. So I want to ask, first off, what would you tell designers who are listening to this episode? Your 2 cents.
My 2 cents. Be realistic about, you know, where you want to go with it, but also be open and try and be really conscious of who you are. What are your strengths, and the things that are not your strengths, how can you make them better? Because if you know yourself, and you will feel confident, you will feel comfortable, and you will bring the best bits of yourself out there.
Well said. We'll put that in quotes. And then what keeps you grounded? So I mean, and it could be like books, it could be podcasts you listen to, you know, it could be like you said, or maybe like a place you like to go to, like when you get burnt out, you're like, I need to go travel here, or, you know, I mean, travel slowly coming. I mean, you're currently sitting in LA right now.
Yeah. Well, it's 2 things, I would say. It's well, first of all, my husband, who doesn't work in fashion and is a very chill person who's super insightful and all about communication. So I think, you know, he always takes it away from the hysteria and the stress, because he's not into that and he doesn't like that. So that, I think, makes it really good. And second thing, and this is going to sound really boring, but I'm sorry, the gym.
You don't have to be sorry.
Well, I mean, you know, I wish I could bring something a little bit more unexpected, but honestly, there is. No, I'm going there almost every morning. You know, so I think without it, I do feel a little less motivated, and yeah.
But you didn't always go to the gym, right? Like, when did that habit develop?
I tried so hard to go to the gym since my early 20s. But I think it took a while for me to find the system and to make it work in my life. And, you know, to also say to other people, oh, I can't do that because I'm going to the gym, or, you know, I kind of had to accept that I was like vain enough that I wanted my body to look good, because that was really my main motivation. But then I think this is the great thing with age. You know, you're less self-conscious, you're less bothered. You're like, you're not happy with that. You know what? F you, I'm gonna do it anyways. So
well, it's, and you know, in a way, it's like setting boundaries for yourself too, right? Like things that make you feel good. And so why would you give that up to go, like you said, socialize or go drinking? I mean, those are fun too, and those make you feel good from time to time. But there is truth to having habits and routines sometimes as well, right? I mean, that's why there's tons of books about it. And, you know, a lot of us are trying to practice and build that kind of routine and habits. So I think that's great that you found that and that it works for you.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I also think, you know, having spent so many years trying to please other people, you know, like when I was saying to you, I'm trying not to be gay, trying to change who you are and stuff. You know, you always have this thing inside yourself where you're like, oh, well, yeah, maybe I shouldn't do this, or maybe I should, you know, like this kind of thing. And it's really hard sometimes to be like, yes, I actually want to do that, or yes, I feel like I should want to do that. And like sometimes they're really hard to tell apart. You're like, okay, which one is it this time?
Yeah. Well, I think that this is just like the beginning part of reflecting on the last 2 decades, and it'll be
Yeah.
fun to see later on, if we pick up again a few years later
Yeah.
to reflect.
What it looks like.
Yeah, because it's ever evolving, right? But thank you so much for sharing that, and I think a
Well,
lot of the
thanks.
creatives who listen to this will probably resonate with the storyline that you've shared. So thank you very much.
Well, I hope it brings someone something. I mean, I just felt like, when I was younger, I wish someone had told me this kind of thing, just to take the kind of like hysteria out of it, and to give it like maybe a little bit more of a serene approach to it, kind of.
Yeah, definitely.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening to Curito Connects. For more Connects content, collaborations, and discoveries set to inspire you on your own individual journey, please head to our website at www.curito.co. Until next time, stay inspired, and thank you for joining us at Curito Connects.